This is Lessons Learned, and I'm your host, Matt Kennard, CEO of Better Lesson. Join me as we dig in with visionary state and district level leaders who share our mission to support every K-12 educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners. Lessons Learned is brought to you by Better Lesson. Let's get started. All right, Lessons Learned Season 2, we're back. And today is an exciting day. We have had some amazing folks who've been on here. And for those of you who have come up in the world of PD and education, we have a guest today who needs really no introduction from me, but I'm going to do it anyway. This gentleman is especially known for research on professional learning evaluation. He is the author of the Guskey Framework. We have Mr. Thomas Guskey with us today. This is a phenomenal opportunity for those of us who've been in the PL world to get to talk about it. And we're going to talk about how that framework might exist outside of just PL. But we are so excited to have you. Thank you for making the time and joining us on Lessons Learned.
Matt, it's really my pleasure. And it's been a great opportunity actually to have our conversations before and explore the commonalities in our backgrounds.
100%. And for all of us who have found our way to education, maybe not known our way was education, it's so interesting to see the commonalities in the stories. And once you get bit by the bug, you're in it for life. So one of the things I love to do before we get anywhere, and I think for folks who've seen the authors of frameworks and others, they often believe that you were like born middle-aged in the education world, fully formed with thought on what the world should look like, as opposed to, going through a number of experiences to get there. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, what brought you into education? Because I know originally that wasn't your plan at all.
Yes, no, you're right. And in fact, it was rather serendipitous for me. I graduated from college with a degree in physics and electrical engineering, only to discover that I really don't have much talent in that field at all, which was a terrible disappointment to my father, who was an engineer. And I told the story that I was at a party one night, talking with a friend of mine who told me about this private school that needed a middle grade math teacher who would also coach. And this happened to be the third week of August. So I thought, that sounds interesting. So I went and applied for the job and they hired me, clearly out of desperation. I mean, the school was about to start in a week and they needed a middle grade math teacher who would coach. But I began teaching middle school, grades 7 and 8. And it is, as you described, I just fell in love with it. I know a lot of people struggle with that age of kids, but they were fantastic. They're totally confused a lot, but it's such a formative time in their lives. And to be able to work with them closely and help them through these different things was magical for me. So I was able to gain my certification. After doing that for several years, decided that I wanted to go back to graduate school, really to learn how to become a better teacher. So I began in Boston, as we discussed, and then ended up at the University of Chicago, having the wonderful privilege of working with Dr. Benjamin Bloom, who was my advisor and shared my doctorate dissertation there. So it was that transition and the discovery of this passion that really brought me to this in education.
I think it's interesting seeing those pathways because they often don't light up. But I think one of the things that, I love about education is there is such a diversity of experience of folks who came in, folks who were always destined to do that. They brought different pieces into it. And, as a child of 2 lawyers who disappointed them going into business, I'm joking. They've been very happy with me taking my own path. I do understand that idea, though, of falling in love with something else and becoming a little disillusioned with whether it's engineering or the law and saying, okay, I want to forge my own path. And for those of you who are not in education listening, if you haven't thought about it, at least consider maybe your dare to be great situation is waiting on the other side of a school building wall along the way.
No, that's so important. And I find that it's really difficult. I think we too often want to ask 18-year-olds as they enter college to choose what they want to do for the rest of their lives. And I looked recently, the Office of Educational Statistics has recently indicated that 80% of college students change their major at least once, and over 50% of college graduates are working outside of their major. So it's a sort of thing that it takes us a while in our lives, and perhaps now even more to really discover where we want to make that important contribution, where we feel that we have something to contribute.
I like that idea that your major doesn't define you. I was a history and poli sci major who went into investment banking, so we can consider that like a bizarre piece. But you know, I I feel very privileged that I had folks who also said, "There's really not going to be a time in life like college if you choose to go that route, where you can study for passion and really, go after things you care about." And I was fortunate enough to get that luxury, and um, I feel very privileged to look back on those 4 years, having gotten to do something that really was impactful and interesting, even if it didn't have anything to do with the rest of my
Yeah.
life.
So where was the turning point for you? Was there an event or something that happened that took you in this different direction?
Yeah, I've talked about it in different ways. After spending a number of years as a banker and an investor, and then doing M&A for a number of larger companies, I was working for a large media conglomerate, and it was right after the um, 2016 election cycle, and I think for me, it came down to continuing to work through that world, and it was really interesting, and I was getting to do cool deals and build a business, but it also, as I looked at it, the media conglomeration also means that, it's also antithetical to the idea of really good, robust local reporting, and I really think that people are best served when their news also incorporates authentic storytelling from their locale, right? And I think that we want to think about not only what happens with the temperature of our national stories, but what happens in your state and region, in your city and your town. Your alderman election is just as important as your Senate election at the state level. In fact, you can make an argument that the alderman election might be even more in terms of the impact for your day to day and what happens with things like school choice or taxes or whatever else those things may be. And so for me, I looked around and I said, "Hey, I want to get to a place where I feel like my day to day is productive and useful, but is also helping other people live the best version of their own lives where they can feel like they're strong contributors to their families, their communities, right? And have an opportunity to develop and contribute in a way that feels meaningful and rational to them." And I was very lucky to be introduced to two amazing ed tech co-founders, Alex Garrier and Eric Westendorf at LearnZillion. So shout out to those guys back in 2018, who hired me without even an in-person interview, and went from living in Texas to living in DC in like 20 days and in the ed tech world. And it's been now almost a decade, and um, it has been the absolute making of me as both a professional and a person. And I can't thank those guys enough for taking the chance, and I'm so thankful for this industry.
That's terrific. Yeah, it is such a wonderful thing when you find that passion that allows you to combine what you want to do personally with what you're doing professionally. It's like Mark Twain said, "You find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life." But
And you don't. You may fret a little bit. You might have a few
I
stressful
know.
moments along the way, but I do think that it's been, a wonderful opportunity to come in here and do it. And the thing that I've really loved is most evolutions in most industries come from people with fresh eyes looking at it and saying something and seeing something different. And I think that, if you think about, for instance, the Kirkpatrick model, which is used in other industries, right? That was meaningful as you started thinking about the Guskey framework back in 2000, right? We can use independent observation from different places to improve what we do every day. And I've loved the opportunity to see myself and others bring our own experiences that exist outside of the world. That's why I came to PD. Someone spent 10 years and some amount of money trying to turn me into a competent finance professional. And yet I turn around and I look at teachers and we say, oh, he or she is born to be a teacher. Well, great. I live in San Antonio. Victor Wembanyama was born to be a basketball player, but we also decided perhaps we would try training him a little bit and see if that helped.
All right.
So I like the idea here of, can we bring new things in? And I think that, that evolution of PD in particular, it feels like we're tracking, but we're just tracking a little behind where curriculum went and technology has gone in the classroom.
Well, no, that's such an important point. In fact, we always find in the field of education that understanding your content is really important. Uh, we refer to this as sort of content knowledge. But if that was all that was necessary to be a good teacher, you would find the best teaching occurring in universities because there you have the subject area experts. Typically, if you want to find examples of pretty poor teaching, you need to go no further than your nearest university. With something other than that, and I think what you described, having that passion that helps you understand your subject in different ways and be open to new perspectives is such a critical dimension to what it requires to be a good teacher. We call it pedagogic content knowledge, where you understand the content so well and have such passion for it, you can see it from a lot of different perspectives and realize that the children and your students are seeing it in different perspectives too. There's tremendous sort of quality in a teacher that really makes them be able to communicate those ideas in better and in more effective ways.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I started my career in digital core curriculum, and I think there was a real turning point with the introduction of ed reports. It felt like for the very first time, not only do we have an independent arbiter of quality, it gave you or district leaders the coverage to, the old saying, right? You never get fired for hiring IBM, right? You never gonna get fired for hiring the big three. And if you take a chance on something else, maybe you will. And it seems like Ed Reports was the first time where we could say, hey, if you look at the OER curricula, like in illustrative mathematics or EL education, they actually are competitive or better than what you've been traditionally buying. And here's a way to justify to your school board, your community, why you're taking a chance on these pieces. They're pedagogically more rigorous. They make more sense. They're more easily deployed. PD, it feels like we're starting to hit that somewhat watershed moment as we've had to get through COVID. We've had to think about emergency certification. It has forced our hand in what it means to really support great teaching and learning. Over the last decade or so, what have you seen or what are you feeling in that change as someone who's been observing this for quite some time?
Yes. Well, I think clearly the most important and most relevant aspect that has compelled everybody to change is the advances in technology. Uh, I mean, the idea of how that has changed the access to instructional materials. Uh, we've gone away from the idea of everybody having a comparable textbook to having custom-made textbooks for different situations. Even here at the university, we used to have a textbook for every course, and now most publishers have gone to a different style whereby you look at the 30 chapters that are in the typical EdSci textbook and recognize you cannot cover all 30 in an 18-week course. And so what you do is you write to the publisher and say, well, I want these 20 out of your 30 as a part of what I'm doing. And then they generate for you a textbook custom made for your particular orientation. Now with AI, then it's changed things completely. So teachers, in fact, I've been arguing teachers no longer need help in developing assessments because AI will do that for them. What they need help with is how to use those results, and AI.
Differentiation. Yeah.
Yes, AI can't help them do that. And so it's changed the orientation of what teachers most need in terms of being able to really facilitate the learning of their students.
It's interesting. We talk about AI and differentiation. Where I think it will be helpful is when we take the approach of like an iReady assessment, right? Where we're thinking about, as a teacher, I've got 24 to 30 students in my classroom. I now, to your point, using AI and thinking about alternative assessment even, right? Like oral assessment. And for everyone who's so scared of AI cheating, try alternate oral assessments. It's really going to help you try something different. By the way, also a better way to think about skills mastery. Anyway, putting all that aside, if you can actually get to where a student sits from a mastery perspective, now you've got to differentiate for tomorrow. When we are able to think about interconnection, right, of data from other places and other systems, now you really have something interesting because for once you can now look beyond, hey, my experience of 1,000 students or 10,000 students to here's what's happening with millions of students who've been there, and these are the techniques we've tried, right? It feels like that role of the teacher is changing to include data analysis as like an actual part of the work. But in using that, we've like gotten rid of a bunch of the stuff that was a waste of time. Like we can set up your lesson plan, we can give you the teaching notes, right? Which you had to spend a lot of time on. And now you can really be focused on your student every day.
Yes. Well, again, one of the things that I keep wanting to remind educators is that we do have a really rich knowledge base, a profound knowledge base on which we can draw. So what you're suggesting is just right on target, but these ideas are actually pretty old. When Benjamin Bloom was first developing the ideas of mastery learning in 1968, he described how teachers could use these sort of brief classroom quizzes as learning tools rather than just evaluation devices. But when asked how to analyze it, Bloom said, well, after the quiz is over, simply make a tally of how many students missed each question. And so I do this in my classes today. He said, if you come to a question that half the students in your class missed, that's not a student learning problem. That's a teacher problem. And so his idea was this offers feedback to students as to what they've learned well and where they need to spend more time or take a different approach. But it's also important feedback for the teacher to find out how effective their instruction was. So in both those ways, the teacher can get better in their teaching, but also guide students in correcting their learning errors so they become more successful and truly master any subject area.
It's been interesting. One of the questions that, from an evolution of PD perspective, even to the thinking about impact, a better lesson we've taken the tact in the last couple of years to really actually focus more on the leader than the classroom teacher, which I know, like, someone's going to come at me for this one, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that particularly when we think about, for instance, year one of the adoption of a high quality instructional material, to me, making the environment permissible for teachers to productively struggle themselves in that implementation, learn what good looks like, try, measure, learn in their classrooms, and building robust observation and tools so leaders can actually help folks move to not only building structures and systems that help them, but being able to show proof of real ownership of the change at a district level feels like the right answer. And if you think about that, that maps obviously levels 3 and 4 of your framework. But I think PD can become a powerful lever, and your framework can become a powerful lever for thinking about impact in terms of not only did we do something and did someone feel more confident, right? And listen, NPS scores matter. Teachers and end users feeling like they are seen and heard. It's useful, usable, and delightful as an experience, which PD often is not, right? We can do better. But really pushing our leaders to say, how are you building the structures so you can own the change sustainably, feels like we have to really be pushing that outcomes-based driven PD as opposed to, did we get everyone and do we check a box? But that feels like a conversation that's been hard to have until recently. And, as someone who came from outside of education, I look at that and I say, why? I would hope that actually be where we'd want to start, because if we can get leaders on board to building the environment, you're going to create a much more receptive environment for the educators who are asking to do the hard thing in the classroom.
Right. No, you've captured the heart of the issue here. I know several years ago I was being interviewed for the professional journal of the Learning Forward, and in this interview I was asked when teachers are using new ideas or experimenting new curriculum or trying new instructional materials, How soon should they see results? Now, good friends of mine, um, Andy Hargraves and Michael Fullen and people like that were talking about how change is a slow and gradual process. We must sustain support for it over time. I said in 2 weeks, and they were stunned. They were absolutely stunned. And I said, because all of our evidence indicates that that teachers are reluctant to sacrifice their children for the sake of innovation. And there is this chance. It's not that teachers are afraid of change or reluctant to change. It is just they are so committed to the learning of their kids that they are not going to sacrifice their well-being and their learning for the sake of something new. And so you must build into any innovation some strategy whereby teachers can gain feedback to see if it's working. I mean, I equate it with I'm getting now these advertisements for these different exercise programs. And they're all very similar because what they say is that you're going to feel the results in 1 week, you'll see the results in 2 weeks, and your wife is going to compliment you on the results in 3 weeks, right? Well, that's very powerful because people say, "Well, sure, I can keep up something for 2 3 weeks." Um, but and again, it's this idea that because of the teacher's commitment to students, we need to build in these mechanisms to show that they are really making a difference, and it's better for them. Just as kids need the sense that they are more effective as learners in classrooms, they can succeed in learning environments. Teachers need this too. Now, the advantage is that programs like the Mastery Learning that Benjamin Bloom talked about, the regular use of formative assessments, offer you that tool where teachers see on a pretty regular basis whether their kids are getting it or not. And that's such a powerful device for teachers that I will continue to do something if it's really helping my kids, even if it's more work, if it's helping me kids. But I need to see that it is. And teachers have been led astray so often that they're kind of skeptical about things. And so they need to have some mechanism built into it whereby they can see that this really does make a meaningful difference for them. And meaningful means that they see it in terms of their children in their classrooms.
I think sometimes we, in an attempt to not overload people, gatekeep the outcomes we're looking for.
Yeah.
And I think that the more open, at least in our experience as an organization, the more open we are and we're able to get leaders to be with their teachers, and not just their teachers, right? I think this is kind of part of the interconnection. We think about in your framework, right? If we're going through the multiple levels, and I think we do this a lot in PD today, right? Where we care about participant reaction and we care about participant learning, right? I think PD has done a wonderful job over its history of saying, like, did you like it? And did you feel like you came away with something you could use? Right. And as we've evolved, did you come away with something you could use tomorrow in your classroom? Right. Bring more immediacy. But but we stopped at that point. Right. And for those of you who are wondering, I mean, this is like, we're 25 years in, right? And we've been stopping at level 2 for a long time. And I think the push I have is to say this: PD can no longer be the bastion of, did my teachers like it? Hopefully they do, right? That's a big piece. Like, if you're gonna ask someone to learn something, making it a interesting experience matters. But I think when you think about level 3 and 4, and you think about the complexity of what we're trying to do in a school district on a regular basis, at level 3, are you bringing the organizational support and change? Are you thinking about an outcome and aligning all of the work at the superintendent level, at the cabinet level, at a level we didn't talk a lot about, at a principal level? Because, by the way, if you do not get the CEOs of each building on board, you will have lost islands in your district. And then all of those instructional coaches. And ultimately, you then do get to the classroom teacher. But if that outcome is universal and the work is around that, you can actually bring organizational level change. And then you got to observe it. You have to do instruction rounds. You have to do learning walks. You have to do surveys. You have to start looking at the short-term indicators of change. And I think that now you're gonna have to get me off my soapbox. But I think that if we can really start focusing on those two, The nebulous thing, your level 5, did we see changes in student outcomes? That is an outcome of the first 4 steps. That's the 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 5.
Yeah. And though you're absolutely right. In fact, with the new edition of Evaluating Professional Learning is coming out in November of this year. Uh, and as in developing that, I looked at the extensiveness by which this model has been used. That it's been cited, the book on evaluating professional development has been cited over 7,000 times in different studies and research articles. It has been the topic, the focus of over 40 doctoral dissertations during the time. And what those doctoral dissertations in many cases have actually shown is exactly what you're saying, that when we look at where things break down and where we find the biggest trouble spot is that level 3, the organization, change, and support. That we do things right from a training perspective. And so people like it and they're learning some good things, but then they go back into organizations that are not set up to support them to do the things they're asked to do. Your other point too, which is so well targeted, is that at level 3, we're finding probably the most critical dimension is the support of the building leader, especially the school principal. In fact, that person is so important that I've come to this stage in my career whereby when I am called upon to work with any school, the first thing I do is have a conversation with the principal. And my warning to the principal is this. I say, look, if you leave while this session is going on, the one thing you can trust is this. I will be right behind you. That your presence is so important here, and it just communicates so much to your staff. Now, I will tell you that building principals, in my experience, are unusually committed people, and they really want to do good things. There's just not a lot in their background or training has given them an idea about how to do that well. And so when you offer even modest suggestions, but they're willing to go along with you and will support those efforts because they want the same thing that the teachers want, and that is the improvement for their kids. And so when it comes back to the model, the 3 things I always stress when I describe the model is, number 1, that all 5 levels are important, but all 5 levels are distinct. And they do require, each level requires a different kind of information. So the kind of evidence you gather at participants' reactions is different from the evidence you gather at participant learning. And it's different from the evidence you gather to secure organization support and change, which is different from what you'd gather looking at degree of implementation or use, and different from what you gather at student learning. But all 5 levels are important. Second, that each level builds on those that come before. And once it breaks down, it goes no further. And so that's why the order becomes so important. But third, and probably most important, when you plan professional learning, the order has to be reversed. That the first thing you must consider in planning any professional learning experience for educators is what impact you want to have on your students, and what evidence would you trust to verify that impact was made. Now, what's crucial too for everybody to understand is that different stakeholders in this process trust different kinds of evidence. So that several years ago, I did a study where I took 15 different indicators of student learning, and they ranged from things like nationally normed tests, state assessments, final examinations, quizzes, homework completion, things like that. And I gave them to different groups of educators. And I said, all of these could be considered valid evidence of improvement in student learning. What do you think is the best evidence? What evidence would you most trust? And I asked them to rank order them. So they had to compare each with every other. And what amazed me is that after doing that, I compared the rank ordering of teachers and school leaders. Almost exactly reversed. It was exactly reversed. The school leaders said, well, it's those large-scale assessments, the state assessments, that's what is in a newspaper. That's what the board cares about. Teachers said, not all that important. We do it once a year. We don't get the results back for weeks or months. By that time, my kids may be off with someone else. I trust my own evidence. I trust the things I see from my kids. And so what I hope that says to leaders is, number 1, you can't trust a single source of evidence. You got to deal with multiple sources of evidence because you got multiple stakeholders. But number two, you have to consider the people whose perspectives are most crucial in this and find ways to gather that evidence in ways that make sense to them and really are meaningful to the kind of things that they consider important.
There's a row the boat in the same direction piece to this, and it's interesting. Like we're living in an interesting time, right? We know that federal budgets are going to be cut for next year, um, right? I mean, I think while the 7 billion was released for this year of federal funding, you can almost guarantee that the budget will be smaller next year. That'll have a variety of impact, but certainly a Title II impact. Um, we also know that, and I actually going to argue that this may be a good thing. There's never been a greater focus on 2 points in our education system like there is right now, which is, are students legitimately post-secondary ready, i.e., are they ready to persist in their choice of employment, enrollment, or enlistment in a meaningful way, right? Not that I just get into college, not that I just get hired, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, am I still gainfully employed or progressing forward? Right. Or maybe I get employed and then go to college because someone pays for it. Whatever that may look like, was high school a meaningful touchstone point for me to be post-secondary ready to become a contributing community member? And then secondly, if you're going to spend money, show proof or evidence that what you're supporting actually had long-term outcomes, and a long-term impact on your students. And the thing that I like about this, and I'd love your opinion on this, because maybe I'm just like, off on the side here, as ex-finance guy now opining, but I think that it moves the unit of change from where we love to be from a heart center, right? Which is one kid, one classroom, one teacher, to what is a practical approach to the systemic decline we've seen in our ability to educate American students, right? Which we need to be thinking at the district and state level. And if we can start thinking about outcomes and using this pressure for post-secondary readiness and ROI, now the leader comes into sharp focus as how are we thinking about PD as a lever that they can be pulling in service of that. But I like that because it actually forces PD, which I think sometimes doesn't occur within the world of strategic planning, to now become a critical part of your strategic plan.
Right. No, you're right on target with that, and I agree with you completely. I think that first, I think that we don't need to help educators understand that there is difference between evidence and proof. And to prove that our professional learning things make a difference requires a level of experimental rigor that's very difficult to attain in most practical school settings. I mean, we don't have the control where we can randomly assign students to classrooms or teachers to schools or teachers to classrooms, things like that. But what I find in talking with leaders and policymakers and politicians is they're not asking for proof. They're asking for evidence. Their frustration is that they see all this money being allocated and things not getting any better. And so for us just to provide some evidence to say that, hey, look, we're getting better. Kids are learning more, they're becoming more talented in these areas, and our evidence is indicating that. Now, whether it was the professional learning, whether it was a change in teacher attitudes, whether it was a turnover in staff or anything like that, that's less important than the idea that it is getting better. And even when recently, most of the studies I've been doing have been focusing on parents and families and their disposition toward it. And I find that across the board, parents do not question us with regard to rigor. They question us about clarity. They want to know what those expectations are. And I think that to the degree we can be clear about that and indicate to parents these are the things that we think are important for students to learn, and we want everybody to learn these things really well. That we'd never put something in a curriculum we expect some kids not to be able to learn. And to help parents understand that learning in any subject area is infinite. There's no limit to what you could learn in any subject area, any academic discipline, but a curriculum is finite. And when we define that finite curriculum, then our job as educators becomes having all of our students learn it really well. Like I said, we would not put something in a curriculum we expect some kids not to be able to learn. It just doesn't make sense. And so we have to judge our success in terms of having all students learn that excellently. Now, people can ask the question about, are those the things that everybody should be learning? And those are good, important questions. And those need to be addressed. And we need to be in a position where we can defend those decisions. But the idea is that once we make those decisions, then our job is really clear. What can we do to have all students learn it excellently? And what evidence would we trust to verify that they did?
Yeah, I really like that, and I also think that what this starts to do, and this is a from a personal perspective, we all think about like what are some of the impacts we'd like to leave. One of the impacts I'd like to see us leave as an industry in the PD world is that we remembered that the leader is the person who, in many respects, needs the most support to get there, because they need to be able to pull the levers, whether that is your HQIM choice or what you do about your turnaround schools, or how do you deal with significant economic or social disruption in changes. If you're leading Milwaukee Public Schools, the Milwaukee Public Schools from the '80s look very different from the Milwaukee Public Schools of today. That is a massive shift that's occurred over 40 years, but in the span of time, that's basically a generation and a half. That's not a lot of different, time for that type of economic or social differentiation to take hold and settle. So like we're asking these leaders to do incredibly difficult things. How are we going to push back to ed tech as an industry, not thinking about what we do as point solutions, right? Or we do PD in this one specific area, but instead, how are we thinking about bringing like networked solutions to a leader that says, hey, your PD and your HQIM and your school turnaround plan all need to work together. And hey, if we're going to sell you something, we actually owe it to you to help you plan it, implement it, and then effectively report on the change. Because actually, if we're holding ourselves accountable for the dollars being spent on what we do, we should be in the same boat as that leader in terms of someone saying from an accountability perspective, hey, what you did made sense or it didn't.
Mhm. No, that's true. And I find in my conversations with leaders, we talk about how they should give about planning professional learning experiences. Uh, Most have been told, and over decades, that they need to begin with a needs survey. You do a needs survey with the staff and determine what it is they need, and you focus on those things. But what I stress to them is that needs surveys offer you good information. It's just that they're misnamed. When you do a needs survey, rarely if ever you're getting needs. Teachers are not really good at describing what they need. I mean, if they knew what they needed, they'd go out and get it. Uh, what they describe to you in a needs survey are problems, concerns, dilemmas, troublesome issues, and wants. If you focus on that alone, you're probably going to do stress reduction workshops from now until the end of time, right? What you need to do, and
Look
what
like a
you do,
Google Office,
that's
like with
right.
like a sushi bar over here,
That's
massage table
exactly.
here, steam room off to the
Yes.
left.
But what we have to do is see those as not needs, but as symptoms of needs, and need to be understood on a deeper level to really understand what's underneath that and how we can approach those underlying causes that prompt those needs and bring about those problems and provide teachers with ways that they can really have the more powerful effect on learning your kids. Some school leaders will say to me, but Tom, you have to understand, I'm so far removed from the classroom. I deal with people who deal with people who deal with kids. And so how can I be focusing on student learning? My response is always this. If you did everything in your job that you think you're supposed to do, and no kids learned better, would you count yourself a success? You say, well, of course not. Well, then I say, then you need to focus on student learning. And everything you do has to come down to that bottom line. It's a means, and the means that you craft can be very different depending on the context of the school. But the bottom line is still the same. How's it benefiting your kids?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that, if we can remember amidst, yeah, we work in an interesting place. And I know you're now working on new guidelines, thinking about coaching programs, grading reform, skills mastery. And unfortunately, our podcast is not 4 hours long. Um, I think that what you just said there is probably the most important thing. And I think that we can get caught up in news cycles. We can get caught up in the NAEP scores, et cetera. But everything we get caught up in is really a symptom of the same problem. Our outcome needs to be 100% of students who are walking across the graduation stage are ready for the world. Right? If that's our goal, right? And in a world-class place, like I think I really do believe in the promise of public education. I believe the idea that it's a meaningful differentiator for us as a country that we are providing a public education system that, regardless of where you're born, you should be able to walk out with a world-class education. It allows you to be a meaningful contributor to yourself, your family, and your community. If that's the goal, then to your point, the only thing that really matters is, did what we do contribute to producing those students, and did what we spend on, everything else we spend on is ego and fluff, right? If it doesn't contribute to that thing. And I think that in a world that's complicated, there is something to be said for some real narrowing of focus to say, hey, there's lots of things we may agree or disagree with, but the one thing we can unify around is that a student who comes to us to be educated is the person we need to serve. How have we served them today?
Exactly. No, I'm with you completely on that, Matt.
So, all right. Well, I know we could do this for hours. I appreciate you taking the time, but I have to ask this question. Listen, for me, that's what gives me hope. I think the narrowing of focus, sometimes it is darkest before the dawn, or if you sometimes you find yourself now, keep going. Right, that daylight might be right around the corner, but that narrowing of focus, I think, actually gives us a way forward. Um, that is where I hang my hat on hope. But I'd love to hear what gives you hope as you look at our system and you think about what's coming.
Well, I think one of the things that drew both of us to education is that uh, when you walk into a school and you see that wonderful interaction between teachers and kids and what they're doing and how they care for each other, uh, you know you're in the right area. You know you're doing the right thing. What gives me hope, and I've always said this, we have the best job there is in the world because we get to work with educators. And people do not go into education because they want to make a lot of money. They do not go into education because they want to have lots of power and influence. They go into education because they want to do good things for young people. They want to help them. And and wow, how better or what better clientele can you have than that? I mean, I have a sister who is a nurse, and she works with sick people all the time. I have another sister who works as uh, a legal assistant, and she works with criminals all the time. I work with beautiful people all the time, and I see how great this can be. And I think it's that sense that what brings people, and now more than ever, we find that to be the case. It used to be that education was something you could fall back on. That if you couldn't get a job doing what you really wanted to do, then you could always become a teacher. But it's not that way anymore. People that go into education are going in because they want to make that difference. They want to make a difference in the lives of young people. I had the wonderful experience when, just a few years ago, when I first began in education, and as described here, as a middle school teacher. I taught primary grade 7 and 8. And in the school where I taught, the kids sort of were together from kindergarten through 8th grade. Then they went on to different high schools overall. So the real cohort group in school was that group from kindergarten to 8th grade. And that's the group they really celebrated. So this group of kids that I had my first couple of years teaching were having a reunion. and they invited me to come back. And it was wonderful because you get to see these kids who are now their parents, and and they're in their careers and doing wonderful things. One of the kids said, little guys that I struggle with and was on top of all the time has now become a prominent judge.
It's like judge or minister, right? Like you become one of the two in that case.
In talking with them, when I guess what they said to me that I felt best about was they said, we learned some things in your class and you helped us out a lot, but we always knew you cared. And I thought, wow, I'll go with that. I'll take that any day. And so what makes me hopeful is to see that same kind of caring persist. I mean, I am absolutely convinced that if we really want to make America great again, let's focus on education. I mean, it's the best means for doing that. And we have always we've been the leaders in the world. We need to enhance our system up because we fall a little bit behind in that. But let's support this and do it in the way that we really know how to do it. We've got the best research. We've got the best researchers. We've got uh, the best facilities. We have the foundation to do this really well. We just need some support in order to get it done.
Wholeheartedly agree. Well, Mr. Thomas Guskey, thank you. This has been one of my favorite conversations of the year. I really appreciate the time and the effort, and looking forward to your new guidelines coming out in terms of evaluation, especially around coaching. And, that's it. Lessons learned season 2. This is a barn burner of an episode. Thank you, as always, to our audience for your time. Love having you on. And if you'd like to hear more, always feel free to go out and check out podcast.betterlesson.com. Mr. Guskey, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation.
That wraps another episode of the Lessons Learned podcast. Thank you for listening. For show notes and more about Better Lesson, please visit betterlesson.com/podcast. Lessons Learned is hosted by Better Lesson, the leading provider of data-driven, high-impact, system-wide K-12 teaching and learning solutions. We partner with states and districts to support every educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners who are college and career ready. Our work has impacted more than 80,000 educators and nearly 3 million students nationwide. See you in the next episode.